Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of What's on My Desk. Today's episode is going to be about a bunch of icons. That's right, I'm going to talk about iconic watches as I see them, and I'm sure most of you will consider them just the same after this episode is over. But before I get into it, I actually wanted to ask you guys a question.
I'd like to ask you a few questions.
I replaced 3 Q&A episodes with SIHH reviews because you guys had a lot of questions about SIHH. And just the same, now that Basel is over, you guys have a bunch of questions about Basel. So rather than replacing the Q&A episodes that I put out every Tuesday, and again, getting behind on my questions that you guys are all asking me, I was thinking about taking a break from the What's on My Desk for the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Say what?
And replace those with Basel reviews that are technically not going to be What's on My Desk because I don't have any of the new watches here, obviously. But this way, it will allow me to continue answering your questions in the Q&A series and yet still get in a Basel review in lieu of the What's on My Desk. So comment below, let me know if I should do that or if I should skip Q&As, continue the What's on My Desk, and replace the Q&As with Basel reviews. Whatever you guys comment, I'll go that route. In the interim, let's talk about icons. What did I bring with me? I brought with me Corum Bubble watches, and I brought a few just to show you a few variations. I also brought the IWC Portuguese chronograph, as well as the Breguet Type 21 flyback chronograph. Hello, Gary. How you doing? So I'm going to kick things off with Breguet Type 21. And I spoke about Breguet, and I mentioned before this is an iconic watch to me. And I'll tell a little bit of why this is an iconic watch. Now, what I have here is a Type 21, which is the predecessor to the Type 22. It is a flyback chrono. Even though this is a very sporty watch, very unlike Breguet, it still carries a lot of the characteristics of a Breguet. For example, if you look at the side of the watch, that is your typical finish on pretty much every Breguet watch with the lines going up and down. If you look at the dial, again, classy dial on a sporty watch. Now, you do have the big numbers, you do have the big hands, the flyback chronograph, but nevertheless, if you look at the dial, it still carries that clean characteristics of Breguet. I don't know if you guys can pick up the color on this dial. It's sort of that charcoal gray, I guess I would call it, that somewhat changes color as you move the watch around, and I absolutely love that. Bracelet is a perfect match to the watch, not too big, not too small. I think it's simple and to the point. Obviously, the crown itself is going to scream Breguet with the big B in the middle, as well as, again, the style of the crown itself mimics that of the Breguet classy watches as well. It is a flyback automatic, closed back. This is the one watch where there's not a whole lot of frills. Breguet, you usually find Breguet showing off the back of their movements, and often you'll see beautifully decorated movements. But again, this was meant to be more of a rugged sports watch. And again, they sort of got the cost down by not decorating the movement, showing off the movement, and make it a somewhat simpler by retailing this watch at only $13,400 in comparison to our Breguet. It's fairly expensive. And today you can pick this watch up on the pre-owned market around that half price mark range, maybe a little bit more. So it still holds its value really, really well. Let's talk about where the Type 20 came from. 1959, the French Army commissioned Breguet to make them military watches, and they made the original Type 20, which I'll have Ian pop up there. What's up with the name Type 20? Well, Type 20 was simply the number of the contract that they got from the French military, hence it was contract, I guess, number 20, so they made the Breguet Type 20. Fast forward to the 90s when they started producing the Type 20 as part of their regular lineup, and then came out with the Type 21 and the Type 22, making them bigger, improving on the movements and so on and so forth. This sort of started an era where Breguet said, okay, we're going to bring ourselves into the modern world and get away from the traditional dressy, classy watches, and we're going to introduce something that's more sporty, that's something up more to the times. And what better way to do it than revive an old classic from 1959? In fact, one of the watches that I cover for my collection is one of those original Type 20s from the 50s. If I could ever find one, that's certainly something that's going to land in my collection. It's going to stay, at least for a while. You know me, I don't collect, I tend to sell all my stuff, but original Type 20 to me would probably be as iconic as the A serial Royal Oak that I have currently. There you have it, original Type 20, the Type 20 that was reintroduced in the 90s, Type 21 and Type 22. Again, it's an icon in its own right. And for those that are into watches, this is certainly one of those watches that I always say one must have in their collection. Whether it's a Type 20, 21, or 22 really is irrelevant. Moving on to the IWC Portuguese chronograph. Now, The IWC Portuguese chronograph. I mean, unmistakably a Portugieser. Whenever you look at an IWC and you look at any model from the Portugieser line, from afar you can always say, hey, this is hands down a Portuguese. I can tell this is a Portugieser. There's no doubt about it, this is a Portugieser. What I love about the Portugieser myself is the fact that this is probably the cleanest chronograph that you'll ever find out there, and whatever variation you choose to go with, and there's a few variations of the IWC Portugieser. What makes the watch so clean? Look at the size, the real estate that the dial takes up, and virtually no bezel on the watch, which makes the watch seem much larger. Look at the clean hands, the clean numbers, the clean dial. Everything about this watch is just so crispy clean.
Crispy clean, no caffeine. Well, Wu-Tang forever.
Even the buttons is somewhat minimal in the sense that they're very, very simple buttons, no frills, no thrills, so to speak. Again, this is a machine, this is a timing machine.
Great Scott!
And funny I should say that, because the history of the Portugieser dates back to 1939. Why is it called a Portugieser? That's actually, even if you knew nothing about watches, you'd probably say it has something to do with Portugal, right? Well, you're absolutely correct. Two Portuguese merchants approached IWC and they wanted to commission two watches to be made for them. But the trick was that the watches had to be super accurate. Their whole thing was, I want accuracy. And at the time, that type of accuracy could only be achieved within a pocket watch, which is very big. So what does IWC do? They take their pocket watches, they take the movements out of there, they slap them onto the original Portuguese, and I'll throw that up here. And they make the watch very large, but at the same time, very accurate. I'm not sure if the two merchants were happy or not. Bottom line is, they delivered those watches. They were indeed very accurate. But the Portugieser didn't take off. And there were two main reasons why the Portugieser didn't take off at the time. Number one, the watch was very large. We're talking about a standard wristwatch was your 35, 36 millimeters. And now all of a sudden they put these behemoths on your wrist and they're like, wait a minute, this is humongous. You know, it's sort of like today, it would be taboo for a man to wear a 28 millimeter watch. You know, back then it was vice versa. And the second biggest reason, timing. Even though Switzerland was neutral in the World War II conflict, nevertheless, you have to realize what was going on in Europe and in the world at the time of World War II. Not just IWC, but the majority of Swiss watch manufacturers were struggling throughout those difficult times in the world. So fast forward to today, you have a gazillion different variations of the Portuguese line, starting from plain Jane Portugueses to chronographs to tourbillons to perpetual calendars and so on and so forth. So this particular watch earns its place in my book as an iconic timepiece. Again, if I were by some odd chance, I mean, I know that they have those original Portugueses in the museum, the ones that made out of pocket watches. If by some odd chance I ever run across one of those pieces, certainly a watch I would put as part of my iconic watch collections. Today, you can pick these watches up and you wear from $5,000 to $6,000 online. Some of the older versions, some of the newer versions go for a little bit more. And the stuff on the precious metals, I think probably one of my favorites would be this watch in a rose gold. I just happen to love that clean look. Sporty yet rose, very versatile in terms of how you can wear the watch. Just, again, one of those watches that I absolutely love, and I always say one should have one of these in their collection because it is indeed an icon. Moving on to the next icon, and that's going to be the Corum Bubble. And you guys are saying to me, Corum Bubble, really an iconic watch? Well, again, this show is not about me claiming to be the foremost authority in watches and everything watches. This is my opinion, and I feel like the Corum deserves a spot in quote-unquote the iconic collectibles. Now, why is this thing called the bubble? That's pretty obvious. The minute I turn the watch over, and I don't have to show you this, guys, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the Corum Bubble because it is like a bubble. It's an oversized crystal that is made like a bubble that magnifies everything that's inside. It sits high on the wrist. I mean, this is a very high watch. Let me throw these on my wrist, and you'll see the difference in how the watches sit on the wrist. If I do that, guys, gives you an idea of just how high. Not for the small wrist. I mean, this is not a watch that a small wrist guy can wear. I would still wear the watch, and this is a huge 45 millimeter version. I'll get into the versions a bit later, but just to give you an idea how it sits on my wrist, it sits big. But again, I told you guys before, I don't really care. Even if the watch is too big for me, if I like it, I'm gonna wear it. And I have worn bubbles in the past. I brought a few of them just to show you a few variations, but let's talk a little bit of history. Corum is a relatively young company in comparison to some of the other big boys that you see here. It was born in 1955, created by a gentleman by the name of Gaston Ries and his nephew René Bonwart. And again, I don't know if I got their names correct or not. Swiss French is not my thing. What was Corum's claim to fame? The $20 coin watch that later on everybody and their mother followed suit on. But that was their big hit out of the gate, where they took a $20 double eagle gold coin, put a quartz movement inside and made it into a watch. It was a humongous hit. I know guys that do nothing but collect the coin watches, because then later on Piaget did it, Audemars did it, and a slew of other brands follow suit. Again, happens every time, nothing wrong with that. Something is hot, another brand will make it. It is what it is. That was the original claim to fame. Then the first Admiral's Cup was held in 1957, and I think by 1960, Corum has created a slew of Admiral Cup watches, which you guys I'm sure are all familiar with. Let's talk about the bubble, which I have here. The bubble didn't hit until mid-2000, I believe, is when the bubble first came out, and they produced them for a good decade, and they did it in a tiny millimeter size, 35, 40, and then they did an XXL version, which you see here, the 45 millimeters. With that said, they then reintroduced them back in 2015 as limited editions in the XXLs. Things like the Joker, things like Casino, things like Lucifer. I think this is Lucifer, actually. And various other variations. Now, Corum historically has not really resold well. There were too many closeouts and so on and so forth. And you've always often saw Corum watches out there being discounted heavily because the company was struggling and they were just dumping out these closeouts. So you often saw Corum selling at a much higher discount than usual. And I'm not sure who is to blame, if it's Corum themselves, because in 2013 they got bought over by a Chinese group, and I'm not sure if it was the Chinese group that started spitting out these closeouts or it was something that was happening by Corum prior to the bout just to raise funds. Again, I'm not going to comment. I don't really know. But bottom line is till this day, you can find Corum models online discounting heavy duty, and by heavy duty I mean half price on brand new watches. With that said, the bubble was the one thing that never really suffered that fate, because what happened in 2000, the minute these watches hit, is you had this, I don't know if there's a name for them, but you had these Corum Bubble collectors. You had guys out there wanting to get every Corum limited editions they could get their hands on it. And oftentimes, a lot of these Corum Bubbles were actually going over list, while the other models would discount at half price, because there was a huge demand and there was a huge collectability, because this was something different, this was something unique. And it created a group of collectors out there that were specifically out there to get as many of those coveted limited edition bubbles they can get their hands on, and hence creating a collection. And why is that? Because these watches were affordable. Most of them retail in the range of that $5,000 to $6,000 price range. If you were able to get out and get them at just a small discount, they were still relatively affordable to some of the other stuff, and guys went ape over these things. I compare the Corum Bubble collectors to those of the Panaristi, those guys that were collecting all these limited edition Panerais and new Panerais that were coming out. Until this day, you have a ton of hardcore Corum Bubble collectors. Now, is this something that Corum should reintroduce yet once again? Absolutely, because that will create yet another wave of buying from those that have been collecting these Corum Bubbles for a long time. Now, really nothing special about this watch. It's a time-only watch with an automatic movement. What makes it special is all the different variations that Corum came up with to make these limited editions. And I'll show you these three. Alongside with that, I bought a ladies' bubble, and this is probably the cutest watch I've ever seen. I'm going to put this thing here in between to show you guys just how tiny that is. Aww. I mean, you would probably say, wow, this is something I probably want to give my daughter, but tread lightly. This little tiny Corum Bubble, because of the diamond bezel, retails for $5,200. So it's not that cheap. You would think it's cheaper because it's so tiny, but nevertheless, it's a super cute watch. I've actually sold a lot of these ladies' pieces because they are super cute. And a lot of guys have bought these for their wives and girlfriends, etc. And a lot of girls, when they see this in person, they just go, oh my God, this is too cute, I want one of these. And with them coming in various color straps and dials, and it just becomes a very cute accessory. Why is this an icon? Why am I lining up these relatively new, funky, crazy watches alongside with the godfather of all watchmaking, Breguet, with a powerhouse like IWC? Well, because to become an icon, you don't necessarily have to have a whole lot of history or a long history. You just have to make a statement. And much like Corum shook the market up with their coin watch, they did the same exact thing with their bubble watches. And it was something that was different. It was something that was avant-garde. And even though the first Corum came out almost 20 years ago, this is still a watch that sits well in today's market, and there's nothing out there like it. And that's what makes watches iconic. That's when it's something different, when it's something out of the norm, when it's something that's done by a company that thinks outside the box and doesn't care what the rest of the world thinks, and it sticks, and the public takes well to it, then your watch does become an icon, at least in my eyes. Again, one of those watches that I feel like any watch collector that wants to put together a diversified watch collection, a Corum Bubble is definitely an addition that is a must. Well, guys, that's it for me for today. I'm not wearing anything on my wrist. What I'm probably going to end up doing is I'm going to end up putting this Portugieser on my wrist, and I'm going to kick this guy around for a week or so. I just absolutely love that watch. I'll wear that for today at least, and then we'll see what tomorrow brings. In the interim, I thank you guys all for watching. Remember to answer my question that I asked you in the beginning in regards to Basel of what you want me to do, because once I post this video, that's going to tell me what I should tape for next week. I'm sure you guys know these videos do take time and effort, not just from me making this video, but my guy Ian editing this video. So as soon as you can let me know what you want to do in regards to Basel, the better. I would appreciate that. In the interim, if you're not subscribed to my channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time for more watch reviews and other videos.